Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. I am Michelle Chalfant. Always happy to be here with you. And today, I'm very happy to be here with you with Mr. Matt Zemon. He and I are getting into a big conversation around psychedelics. And here's why. Because this is probably, I think, maybe the third or fourth show I've done on psychedelics over the years. I'm hearing from more and more of you, and there's a buzz all around the world around psychedelics. And I really want to put out some factual information, some researched information to help you all gain information around these things. Because I got to tell you, when I first started hearing about psychedelics, which was probably about 10 years ago, I started hearing just a buzz around it. Like people started asking me if I knew anything about them, or people were trying them. And I was like, what? Absolutely not. I can tell you 10 years ago, they terrified me. I was like, I don't hardly drink, let alone do drugs. I don't do drugs, and I don't want any part of these things. But what happened was the more and more people that kept asking me about them, it just caused me to say, what are these things all about? So I started doing my own research. I started asking a lot of questions from people that are in and out of the mental health field. And I started getting some really surprising answers back. So I was very intrigued, and I got more and more intrigued, and I did more and more research, and then started having some people on the show. And I get into more of this on the show today again, but I had Matt on the show, and he really answered a lot of the questions that you all have had. So we're going to get into that today. He talked a lot about how and why. Here's the question is, why do psychedelics help people change? Like, what exactly is happening? Also, he talked about, if you're even considering this, which ones do you choose? Like, which one is right for you? We also get into psychedelics and addiction, and he has researched this. I mean, he knows his stuff around this. So we got into that, as well as how psychedelics can actually connect us to our true self. We also talked about many practitioners now are working with psychedelics, but there are some questions that you're going to want to ask a practitioner before you jump in. And we went through like what those questions are. I also talked about, and we both talked about that they're not a magic pill, but they can transform your life. But it's not a quick fix. And we expand on that. Also, who they're not safe for, because there's a certain population that should not be exploring these plant medicines. And lastly, we talked about microdosing. So we really got into it. We talked a lot about psychedelics. So again, I hope you can come at this just with an open mind, because let me tell you, the world is talking about psychedelics. So I would encourage you to gather as much information as you possibly can. That's what we do from our adult chair. We gather information. And I'm hoping that today that my show with Matt will help you with some of that information. And again, it's well researched. I think you're going to really like the show. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit more about Matt Zemon. As an entrepreneur in the well-being sector, Matt was the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Psychable, an online community connecting people who would like to explore the healing power of psychedelics with a network of practitioners and psychedelic-based treatments. And the co-founder of Take 2 Minutes, a nonprofit dedicated to helping individuals improve their mental health and well-being. Matt is the author of Psychedelics for Everyone, a beginner's guide to these powerful medicines for anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD, and expanding consciousness. It is with great pleasure that I welcome to the Adult Chair podcast, Matt Zemon. So welcome to the Adult Chair podcast, Matt Zemon.
Michelle, it's good to be here. Nice to see a fellow North Carolinian.
I know. I love your voice.
Well, thank you.
Does everybody say that? It's very relaxing.
I've never heard
like
that, so I appreciate
it's a good
that.
like meditation kind of voice. I'm like, I was just telling you, I'm like, when I jumped on with you, my computer, my Zoom had decided to shut itself down. So I was a little frazzled. And now I'm like, just talking to you for a few minutes before, I'm like, kind of back into the nervous system regulation mode. It feels good. Your voice is great.
I'm glad to have been able to help.
Thank you. So we're talking about a subject today, but I like your spin on it. I like the spin you're putting on it. You said a different sort of way we're looking at this topic. This is a topic that was new to me many years ago, and I've been doing a lot of research on it over the years. So I'm glad to have you on to hear your take on it. So we're talking about psychedelics today. But tell us your spin. You said you have a different spin on it.
I do. So there are. I've actually never started a podcast with this, but let's do it. I believe there are 3 legs to the psychedelic stool that newcomers should understand. Mm-hmm. The first leg is kind of the obvious medical model. Mm-hmm. So maybe some of your listeners have heard about ketamine, and they're looking to they have depression or anxiety and they want to go to a medical facility and have ketamine. Great, lots of research. Maybe your listeners have heard about the studies being done at Johns Hopkins with psilocybin or magic mushrooms, and again, for in that case, terminal patients. Mm-hmm. Maybe they've heard about the studies that MAPS is doing with people with treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, and that MDMA should be re-legalized across America this calendar year. All right, all of that is the medical leg. It's super important. Both parties have gone behind kind of this concept. We're seeing state and city ballot initiatives. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Second leg of the stool, let's call it the decrim leg. So there's a movement in a number of cities and states that their principle is plants shouldn't be illegal, period, full stop. And they want these plants decriminalized. Mm-hmm. So cities like Washington, D.C., Ann Arbor, Michigan, Detroit, a few in California, the entire state of Colorado, the entire state of Oregon has decriminalized certain plants. And are they legal? No, but they are the lowest priority for law enforcement. And it doesn't really matter what the intention is behind taking a plant in those cases. It should be, in their mind, it's decriminalized. Mm-hmm. The third leg is the spiritual leg. And this is people who say, hey, we are living in a country where the First Amendment protects religious freedom. And particularly when there is little to no harm to others. So therefore, the practice of using instead of using the word psychedelic, I'm going to switch to the word entheogen, or a substance that can not only change the way you think, but can do so in a spiritual context. Mm-hmm. The practice of using psychedelics as a sacrament is something that is protected by the First Amendment. And we've seen some cases, and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act would be a part of the national example on this, but we've seen like the Native American Church as an example fought to be able to use peyote, and the Santa Daime Church has fought to use ayahuasca. Well, there's, 100, 200 psychedelic churches popping up that are saying, we too should have the right to use these sacraments to connect with our higher power, however it is that we define it, and the government should not stand in our way. And I think that is a beautiful leg of a stool that should be an and in addition to the others. And it's something that it really doesn't get talked about enough. This the importance of the First Amendment as it relates to psychedelic or entheogen use.
Wow. I didn't know this with the churches.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
That's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm. And
Dang.
there's no, and then it gets tricky because the government has not given an easy way for a church to get approved. And it's so cumbersome that most churches are not going to go through the process. They're saying the process itself, where you have to sign under penalty of perjury that you will not use any substances during the approval process, but there's no timeline, that the churches that have tried it have waited years before even a
Wow.
response. They're
Mm,
saying it's an undue burden, which
mhm,
again should not be allowed in this country.
mm.
So it's yeah, I think it's really interesting. And again, there's very many people who take psychedelics in a ceremonial use, and it's, I think if you've ever done that, it's hard to argue that it is not a religious practice. Of course it is.
Oh, I could not agree more. And in fact, it's funny that we're talking about religion because I've actually had conversations around this specifically, like, wow, what is going to happen to organized religion the more people that do psychedelics? Because there is absolutely no denying that when you do a psychedelic, you're emerging with God, like, period. So if that's the way to God, it's an interesting conversation. I've had a lot of interesting conversations and thoughts around that exact same thing because, yeah, it's a religious experience.
It is, and I love the question you're asking of what happens to organized religion when.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like looking at what has happened to organized religion without. And when we see the decline of churches in America, we see the decline of participation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an accident that we've also seen an increase in depression, anxiety, loneliness, suicide, addiction. I
Mm-hmm.
think we have a community crisis in our country, that we're feeling isolated. And I
Yeah.
think there's an opportunity for religion not just to be about telling you how to live your life and giving you kind of rules and swim lanes to play in, but instead to enable a direct, tangible, somatic experience, have people explore their own consciousness, recognize for themselves the interconnectedness of all things and all people, and still want to get together every
Mm-hmm.
Sunday to
Mm-hmm.
sing songs and hold hands and break bread and do all the things that we grew up doing, because community is important. And you're only going to do psychedelics every once in a while, if that. Some people only do it a couple of times in their life, once in their life.
Mm-hmm.
But that community is all the time. And that's super, super important as part of, I think, a healthy entheogenic or psychedelic practice.
Yeah. Oh, good point. I did not think we are going to start here.
I did not either, but here we go.
Here we go, I guess. And I want to let everybody know this is not, I have nothing against organized religion
Mm,
by any means, not at all. But I have had that thought, and I have just a few experiences with psychedelics in a therapeutic setting. And I thought, man, if I can sit here on my couch and sit with what feels like God, wow, wow. I don't even have to go anywhere. But I like this idea of community, of course, that church gives us. But anyway, how did you stumble into this? Like, tell me
mhm.
about how did you become who you are today, and have this interest?
Yeah. Back in 2019, some friends approached me who I trust and said, "Hey, we've hired a guide and we're doing a guided psilocybin or magic mushroom journey. Do you want to come with us?" And I was like, no, I do not. But I appreciate the offer. I wasn't a drug user. I really didn't even drink that much.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of liked things the way I liked things. I liked staying in control. Um, yeah, it wasn't my thing. But they were like, come on, you love to travel, and this is like taking a journey in yourself, and you love to read, and you're going to get to explore yourself. You're going to read yourself in a book.
Mm-hmm.
So, long story short, they talked me into it, and I
Mm-hmm.
went in with pretty low expectations. And in that first 6 or 7 hour journey, the entire way I look and interact with the world shifted. One of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest things for me, my mom died when I was 22. She was 49.
Mm.
And in that very first ceremony, she was there. and I could pull kind of a string or a rubber band between her and me and my children. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's not gone. She's just in this other place that I couldn't really conceive of before.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge eye opener. Then the idea of I felt so incredibly safe and loved. And then in almost the next instant, I was like, wait a minute. I don't normally feel this safe and loved in my everyday life. What's going on? And I didn't even know it. What I
Mm-hmm.
thought was safe and loved, what I thought was living was not.
Mm-hmm.
Overcoming the fear of death that I'd been doing many things, assuming I was going to die young. That wasn't my story. That was her story. And I didn't need to adopt that. So again, insight after insight after insight that then led me to shortly after that retreat, I got someone else to run my business, went back to school to get a master's in psychology and neuroscience, and then have been doing a really deep dive into multiple psychedelic substances with different types of teachers. I've worked with doctors, I've worked with MD PhDs, I've worked with shaman, I've worked with taitas, a variety of people to see how it makes me feel, see what it makes me think, and see what I think try to understand what are the safest ways to have these spiritual experiences. And that has led to this podcast, Michelle.
I love it. So hold on. You had your first psychedelic experience in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
You've been busy.
It's been
Last few
it's been a
years.
very, very busy 4 years.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Really busy. So let's talk about psychedelics. There's so much, people went from feeling like, are you crazy? Kind of like you, I'm not a drug user. That's not something I did that, of course, and I shouldn't say, of course, I did that in college, smoked marijuana. That's the drug that I did. I did not do any sort of psychedelics in college. So now fast forward all these years later, and very quietly in the therapy world, probably about 10 years ago, I started hearing some whispering about it, and then my husband, huge podcast listener. My kids are in Reddit, all this stuff. So this is 10 years ago. That started being a conversation. I'm like, are you guys out of your mind? That was my initial response. Hell to the no, we will never do this. The mom, I'm telling you, no, I don't want to hear anybody. No. So anyway, it led me to then do this research. And my husband's like, I'm going to microdose. I'm like, are you crazy? Like that's, you're going to be drunk at where, it's on drugs at work. No. Anyway, that led me to do a deep, deep, deep dive into what the heck these things are. What's the history of them? What are they all about? And wow, what an eye opener. Like I did not know. And ironically, when did the 60-minute report, because I watched the Johns Hopkins when it was on 60 Minutes, and that was I'm like, oh my God, they're talking about it on 60 Minutes. Like you said, like for addiction, for cancer, all these things. I was like, whoa, okay. So the more I talked about it, of course, the more, again, it was like underground, but now it's not so underground, but the more people whispered about it, it got louder. So if someone's sitting here listening, how do they know where to go, what to do? Like if they go, yeah, I'm hearing about it too. What should they do? Where should they research? Read your book, of course, right? Of course, read your book.
But that's a really great question. And what's interesting to me is you ask the same questions, whether you're looking at a legal provider or a psychedelic tourism provider or an underground provider. And I'm going to start with the legal. So we in America right now, in all 50 states, you can get a prescription for ketamine. And typically there are four primary ways people take ketamine. You can do it through an IV, through an intramuscular shot, through a lozenge under your tongue, or a nasal spray. There are other ways to take it, but those are the four primary.
Okay.
If you go into a ketamine clinic near you, you can expect to pay $3,000 to $6,000 for 6 sessions. If you take it through one of the telehealth companies, and there's a bunch of them, maybe it's $1,200 for 6 sessions. But what are the questions you're going to ask? Well, one of the questions are, what do you do in advance for preparation? Do you do anything?
Mm-hmm.
Some ketamine providers, the pricing really doesn't shift with how they practice, but some believe it's just a biochemical reaction. So you're going to go into that clinic. You're probably going to meet a nurse anesthesiologist who's going to take your vitals. They're going to put an IV in your arm. You're going to be in like a medical recliner.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a 40-minute to an hour experience. And then they're going to send you, you're going to recover, and they're going to send you on your way. You're going to repeat that 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
Other more, I'd say, thoughtful ketamine providers are going to work with you in advance to, what are your intentions? Why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
They might have a more ceremonial approach to how the medicine's delivered. Afterwards, they're going to give you some space to unpack that with somebody. It doesn't have to be a licensed therapist. It can be, but coaches are really good in this area as well. There's no research that says the licensure matters for the integration.
Right.
So finding out what is their philosophy, what do you do before and after, are good questions. Is it just going to be me? So is it a one-on-one experience, or is it a group experience? And I think groups are incredibly powerful, but you just need to know what you're going in for.
Mm-hmm.
Do you give me a musical playlist, or do I need to bring my own, or is there none? If I have to bring my own, what should it be? Are you going to give me a mask to cover my eyes, or do I need to bring one? Those are all questions for legal ketamine that are very similar to what you would ask if you're looking at an international trip to a jurisdiction where a psychedelic is legal, or if you're going to work with an underground practitioner. One more thing I'm just going to jump on in terms of safety here. Most psychedelics, there was a study done by Imperial College London where they said, let's forget how drugs are classified. Let's just look at harm to self and harm to others and rank the drugs. So on the far left, the most dangerous drug for self and others is alcohol. It was a 72 on their scale. As you work your way across drug after drug after drug after drug, all the way in the far right, a 3 on their scale was mushrooms. MDMA is in that zone. LSD is in that zone. Ketamine is a little bit higher, but not much higher. So physically, these substances are relatively safe. What happens when you're on or in a non-ordinary state of consciousness is that life continues to happen. So when life happens and you're in a non-ordinary state of consciousness, things get more complicated. So that's where, is there going to be one person in the room with me or 2 people? Is there going to be a male and a female? Are there going to be a group of people? What are the rules in our interactions with each others during this time? All things to think about before going on your journey. And again, my book has a bunch of these. There's lots of things on the internet for safe psychedelic journeying. Those are good places to start. And then Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, and he's got a 4-part Netflix series, also covers some of these things. It would also, and that's such an easy way for people who are trying to maybe talk to their spouse or talk to their parents or talk to their kids about this, is go sit down and watch that Netflix series together and have 4 conversations after one after each one, and see how that goes.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Who's a candidate?
So that's also a trick question these days. Because to answer that, we have to separate what has been done with the research world versus who is a candidate. So in the research world, our scientists are taught, and it's hard enough to study psychedelic drugs. It's even harder to study them on certain populations. So most of our research excludes a number of vulnerable populations. That being said, it is pretty widely agreed that if somebody is schizophrenic, psychedelics are not great choice. If you're bipolar and in a manic state, not the right time to do psychedelics. You really want to have a firm grounding in this world in which we live before deciding to travel into this other plane. If you've had if you're actively suicidal, it's not the right time. If you've had multiple instances of psychotic breaks, probably not the safest decision for you to have a scheduled psychotic break. That being said, and then there's certainly medications that are contraindicated with different psychedelics. So being aware of what those are. is important. So one of the resources that I talk about a lot is the spirit pharmacist. If you go to his Dr. Ben
Oh.
Malcolm's website, he is a PharmD.
Mm-hmm.
He does private consultations with people all over the country where he'll look at your medications, he'll look at your history, he'll look at your supplements and help you understand which psychedelic medicines are safe, which are kind of safe, and which you probably should avoid. He also does quite a lot of work in the world of tapering antidepressants. So he's got a free guide to how to taper, and he can give you instructions and things to talk with your prescriber about. So it's just an incredible resource in this world. So that's another area of just being aware that not all psychedelics are the same, and some definitely have. You don't want to be on certain medications and taking a psychedelic. I'm just going to add one more quick point here is in relation to the most common medicine that people are taking are antidepressants. I'm just going to stick on this for a moment. If you're taking an antidepressant and they work for you, that's fantastic. That is great. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So there's no pill shaming from my perspective.
Yeah. Same.
If they're not working for you, that's not you failing the medicine. That's the medicine failing you. And they only work in about 40% of our population. So it's more common for it not to work than for it to work. And even if it is working, they were never meant to be something you'd stay on for years or decades. And maybe that you're tired of the side effects. There's a study that came out that showed almost 72% of the people who take antidepressants have some form of sexual dysfunction. It's a pretty high price tag. There's weight gain, there's gastrointestinal issues, there's lethargy. In some youth, there's been suicidal ideation. Price tag's pretty high. Ketamine is an alternative. You don't have anywhere near those side effects. And what's beautiful about ketamine is you can be on an antidepressant while you take ketamine. So it's something that you can, because it works in your glutamate system, you can try it and be like, oh, wow, that did work. And then while you're tapering down, ketamine might be a helpful tool to use. And again, you're not going to take ketamine every day. You take it roughly 6 times within the first 4 to 6 weeks. And then it ranges from once a month to once a quarter to once only with certain episodic events. So it's very different than our daily antidepressants that I think that we're all used to.
What do you say to someone that says that they are afraid of becoming addicted to a psychedelic?
That is a very common response. We grew up in a prohibition that no one told us we were living in. We heard about the alcohol prohibition, but nobody's like, oh, and by the way, we have a prohibition right now against these drugs that's not rooted in science. So we were all told that this is your brain on drug. It's going to be a gateway. You're going to get addicted. And it's going to fry your brain. I'm going to go back to that Imperial College study. Most psychedelics, not all, but most are actually anti-addictive, meaning 2 things. Meaning if you, in animal studies as an example, you give a choice between a psychedelic and food, they're going to go with the food. Taking it a step further, anyone who's had large dose psychedelics, your body knows, I can't do this again right away. I need a break. And you're just not wired. And then even more so, if you do try to take it repeatedly, you build up a tolerance, and it doesn't work. So for most psychedelics are anti-addictive. Ketamine, again, the only legal one, has some addictive components to it. So something to be aware of. We haven't seen addiction in the medical world with ketamine, but we have certainly seen it in the recreational world, and certainly in Asia, where ketamine is wildly popular. They've seen addiction issues. Certain psychedelics might have behavioral dependence items. Cannabis, some people consider a psychedelic, and certainly that falls into that category. MDMA is quite pleasurable and could fall into that category. But for the most part, when we talk about like psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, those are not addictive. No one's getting hooked on those.
Got it. Thank you for that. And what about someone that does have, let's say, an alcohol or a drug addiction? Would a psychedelic be beneficial for them to help them through their addiction?
So there's a lot of research on this in this topic. Interestingly, even before the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, there was lots of research on LSD for people with alcohol use. So much so that Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, worked hard to try to get LSD as part of the protocol. Tying back to where this whole conversation started, it wasn't so much that he believed the LSD's biochemical reaction would make people less likely to drink. His premise with his 12-step program was that the first step is giving yourself to a higher power. And his concern was that in his world, these alcoholics would have a hard time doing that. And that LSD is a forced spiritual experience that would then give them a guidepost to then move into the next steps. We're seeing studies now with smoking, with alcohol, with opioid use that are having phenomenal results. So it is a little bit counterintuitive to think, okay, I have a substance use challenge. Now I'm going to take a substance to get over it. But it works. And I think we're going to see more of this coming up. Ibogaine is an example. If I had a child who was addicted to heroin, I don't know of anything better than Ibogaine to knock him out of that. So yeah, I would find a medical facility in a Central America or somewhere else that I could get them that kind of help. It's kind of amazing. I think the reason why this works for substances is the same reason it works for behaviors. When we think about the things that happen to us, the traumas in all of our lives, the love that we've been looking for that we're not receiving, the things that happen to us that hurt or that we experienced as painful. And some of us then manifest in behaviors. Some might be substance, others might be workaholism, might be gambling addiction, might be sex addiction, might be any of these things. These are behavioral manifestations of something else. The psychedelic process can help us can remember a way that we used to think, maybe before we had adopted those behaviors or had that substance use challenge. And from that remembrance, we can then start to take the steps to change our life to not have that as part of it. And that's where psychedelics are not so much that they're a cure. It's not a magic bullet, magic vitamin. They're really catalysts for change and through spiritual connection and remembering a different way of thinking.
I'm glad that you just said that. It's not a magic pill. None of them are a magic pill.
Not at all.
Even though we have incredible experience while taking them or using them, I should say. I've done ayahuasca once and I've done psilocybin twice. And honestly, I felt like I was sitting with God each and every time. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever done. And you did it in a very controlled setting, with a therapist and all that. But what I'm curious about is like, how would someone know which one is for them? Like, which one, how do they pick and choose? Like, oh, I want to do this, or maybe I should try that. And how do they know?
Yeah, that's a hard question. So I took a stab at that in my book and said, okay, here are the most common substances that you might choose if you are looking for X, Y, and Z. I think in my experience at this point that you start to have encounters, meaning ayahuasca has now become into my consciousness, or I keep hearing about magic mushrooms, or keep hearing about ketamine.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me. Well, it might be enough. You're hearing about this, go with your gut and follow that to see if that's a good fit. You certainly can watch something like Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. You could read my book and be like, oh, this particular, I like the way they describe psilocybin as being connectedness to all things, or I like the idea of an ayahuasca ceremony and working with a Colombian or a Peruvian Taita and having that experience, even if it is physically hard. Or I like the idea of an MDA or sassafras ceremony where my heart is going to be open and I'm going to feel love to myself and others in a way that I don't normally do. So maybe there's something that's just crossed your radar. And then I think the other thing is like, what's your tolerance for risk? I have to be legal, therefore I'm going to use, and I want to stay in the United States. Okay, well, it's ketamine.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
willing to travel and I really am called to mushrooms. Okay, well, Mexico and Bahamas and Jamaica and Netherlands and all sorts of options for you.
Mhm.
I'm willing to go to an underground provider with
Mhm.
that's referred to and that I've heard great things about.
Yes.
And okay,
100%.
then
So
there's other
important.
options for you.
And you were saying the magic pill. I wanted to go back to that. I think that people in our society, we do want that magic pill. We want a quick fix, and this is not a quick fix. And I find that, or found, and I also know other people that have done this. The most important thing was the integration,
Mhm.
right? It's the after the psychedelic effect. Like, what do you do after you've had this experience? And then how do you integrate that into your life? That's where the change happens. It doesn't happen during the ceremony. I mean, you have all these beautiful experiences of whatever you see, everyone sees something different, or experiences something different. But it's afterward. What do you do with that now? Because I've talked to people that go, oh, yeah, I got nothing out of it. I'm like, really? The whole experience? No, the experience was great. But, I'm like, well, did you integrate? No. So talk a little bit about the integration and the importance of that.
Yeah, I think for if as you think about whether how to use psychedelics for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
scheduling time for integration is one of the best practices so that it just doesn't become another experience in your life. I had a psychedelic journey. I went to Japan. It's just
Yeah.
another thing. By
Yes.
having integration, that means you're having someone else that you're talking to, that you're memorializing. These are the things that I thought about and that I experienced in this setting.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I'm going to look differently at my past. Or sorry, this is how I am looking differently at my past and these XYZs that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
These are changes I want to make in my present as I'm now working towards this future. And it's someone else that can help you along the way with that. And I think there's actually two parts of this. So the one is working with, again, a coach, a therapist, is somebody who can help you with this. And then two is, what community do you come into? So if you go right back to your traditional life and all the stuff around it,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, life can get right back to that way quickly. But if you can incorporate some type of consciousness community into some pieces of your life, so that could look like a meditation practice, it could look like singing, it could look like an organized religion, it could look like a whole bunch of things. But having a community that you can talk to about these experiences is really, really powerful and makes, again, you're not alone, you are enough, you are loved. And
Mm-hmm.
here's a whole bunch of people who are going to remind you of that when
Yeah.
you forget or when things get hard.
Yeah. So important. So important. Talk about reclaiming your true self. How does that happen? That's something I
Yeah.
talk a lot about in the adult chair. So I want to hear your take on this.
I'd love to hear how this connects. It seems to me that so let's go back and just talk about all of us as we get older. And we start thinking, oh, well, age is a construct, but we start thinking over and over again, literally in the same way. And that behind the scenes, what's happening? It's our neurons are firing together the same way.
Mhm.
So imagine a ski slope, and you're skiing down it, and the tracks get deeper and deeper. So you can keep doing the runs,
Mhm.
but you're literally skiing the same path over and over. And then that manifests in how you see the world, and how you experience the world. In the psychedelic experience, a few things are going to happen. Your default mode network, think of the inner narrator of your brain, is going to quiet down. And this is that voice that's constantly telling you you're not enough, you need to do more. You would never talk to your closest friend as your inner narrator talks to you. So that quiets down, and then neurons fire together that haven't fired together in a long time. So that's that fresh coat of powder coming over that mountain. And when those things happen, now you're able to ski the entire slope again. It's like, oh, I forgot I could do this. And in this process, it's very common. It's common that you will then feel connected to all things and all people. You'll feel loved. You'll feel enough. And that is, in my opinion, that is the reclaiming of your true self. That, oh my gosh, I do have an innate wisdom that my society and my culture has told me to give up time and time again. Parents know better, teachers know better, doctors know better. I know it. I know in many ways what's good for me.
Mm.
Um, I know I'm loved. I don't need to do anything. I don't need any external validation to know that I'm loved. That's a remembrance, and that's a reclaiming of your true self. And that we are connected. We are all deeply connected. I might have a different body on right now than you, but
Mm-hmm.
we are deeply connected to each other, and
Mm.
that's a remembrance. And just not, it's not what we normally talk about. It's not how we normally think,
It's
but it
true.
is a way to reclaim your true self, to remember those things, and then again, it's not a cure, it's a catalyst to take all that knowledge and move forward. And how does knowing that change your life and change your relationship with your parents and your spouse and your children and your friends and your bosses and on and on and on.
Mm.
And it's a lot to unpack.
So you also talk about psychedelics as a catalyst for positive change. Is this what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Because
Yeah.
now, when you know you're enough and you know
Yeah.
you're loved, and you're starting to take away the masks that you've put on and have been put on you. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't need this. My parents were only able to give me the love they were able to give me, and I'm not getting any more from them, and that's okay. Um, I'm going to do. I'm no longer going to try to please them with everything I'm doing. I'm gonna.
Mm.
I can. Yeah. There's all sorts of different ways to live life. In this abundant mindset, there's plenty for everybody. Um, and also kind of with this I talk about, like, we talk about the 100% rule, that you are responsible for everything you create and everything around you. And if you're experiencing something that's challenging, how is that working for you?
Mm.
Um, and that's all part of this process that I
Mm.
know people go through
Right.
when using entheogens as part of their life.
Very, absolutely. Talk about you. I've got here psychedelics for business. Tell me about that.
Well, so it's, again, what is business? So if we look at business as just another way, there is really no such thing as work life. There's just life. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're generating resources or making money, and sometimes we're not. But
Mm-hmm.
all of it is just living. So, how do we live in our work life in a way that's true to our life? What does that look like? If we are connected to everything and everybody, how do we foster that in our work life?
Mm.
If we are trying not to do harm, how do we not do harm in our work life? If we are
Mm.
trying to help people and share love and share the beauty of the world, how do we do that in our work life? So this again, there's a lot of ways people come into psychedelic ceremonies and their perspective of their relationships in the workplace. What's my relationship with my
Mm.
boss? What's my relationship with my coworkers? What's my relationship with the people who report up to me? What's my relationship with my clients? But all of it starts with, what's your relationship with yourself? And then how are you going to use work as both a way to generate money and as a way to practice and to live, just to live, period.
Mm.
So you're not living for the weekend, you're not living for vacation, you're living for every day.
Mm. That's good. Okay, there's a lot of buzz right now also about microdosing.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the benefits of microdosing?
So let's back up for just a quick moment and just
Yeah,
remind your
please.
listeners that what is a microdose? So a
Yeah,
microdose
that's a good point.
is when someone takes 1/10 to 1/20th of a standard dose of a psychedelic. So up until now, we've been talking about large dose, big journeys,
Mhm.
psychedelic ceremonies. A microdose is typically called subperceptual and certainly subintoxicating. So the idea is that you can take a microdose and fully function. You can go to work, you can drive, you can play with your kids, you can do all those things.
Mhm.
When most people talk about microdosing, they're talking about either LSD or mushrooms. And then mushrooms are probably the most common because they're the easiest to get. There are two why do people microdose? Was your question. The idea is that it helps people feel more connected. It helps people feel more creative. It helps people reduce anxiety, reduce depression. The research is kind of split. There's some research that says, yeah, it does all those things. And there's other research that says, it's probably more of a placebo. So I don't know. There's 309. There are 309 academic institutions studying psychedelics right now, and I would expect we're going to see a lot more things on microdosing here to come. The and there's two kind of primary ways people microdose. So there's Dr. James Fadiman's protocol, and he says, look, take it on day 1, still in your body on day 2, let it flush out on day 3, take it again on day 4. Do that for 4 weeks and take a couple weeks off. And then there's Paul Stamets, who's a famous mycologist's protocol. And he says, no, it's too complicated. Take it 4 days in a row, then skip 3 days, do that for 4 weeks and take 2 weeks off. And then he goes one step further. He says, if you really want to do this, add in a little bit of lion's mane and a little bit of niacin. And that stack is also going to help with memory and dexterity. And I believe he has a patent on those, on that Stamets stack now. But again, that's his protocol. But it is fascinating how many people are microdosing. Certainly out in the in Silicon Valley, and then also across the country. There's a beautiful book called A Really Good Day, which is one woman's 30-day perspective on how microdosing changed her life.
Wow. You've given us a lot of great resources, and we'll be sure to put all of them in the show notes. Like, you have some great resources in this show. So thank you for that.
Of course.
What would, again, though, if I'm listening to the show, like right now, what is an indicator that I might want to even try microdosing? Is it because I'm anxious? Is it because I'm depressed? Is it because I want to be more creative? Like, why am I going to try this microdosing?
So I would say this. It is, whoever's listening to this show has been listening for almost 40 minutes. Why are you still listening to this show? You're listening to this show. Are you looking for permission? Are you looking for a entryway? What is it? You know for yourself what you want to do. If you're asking, are psychedelics safe? What you're hearing is relatively, these are safe substances. If you're asking, are you going to get addicted? You're hearing, no, probably not. If you're asking, where should I start? What do you have access to? Who do you know?
Right.
How do you want to do it?
Right.
And if you're asking, why should I microdose? The reverse question is, why should you microdose? You have a reason you want to microdose or to macrodose. Why are you afraid of that? If it's any of the things we've talked about, if you think it's going to help you, then that's, again, you know best what's right for you.
Right. And what you're drawn to, right?
And
like
what you're drawn to.
Whatever we're drawn to, do further investigating and get more information at the very least.
Yeah, we did miss one thing. I want to go back then because of safety, just because of where we just landed.
Yeah.
There are 3 things we talk about for safety. We talk about source, set, and setting. So source is, where did your drugs come from? Are you confident in the purity of them? So if you're doing a legal ketamine, you probably don't need to ask that question. They're going to use a pharmaceutical grade. They're going to use a pharmacy to fill that prescription, and you know where that's coming from. If you're using medical tourism, probably okay, depending on the country, but still doesn't hurt to ask the question. And if you're using an underground provider, it is a good idea to ask them, where do you get your drugs, your medicine, and do you test them?
Yes.
Sticking on the testing, because a lot of us somehow we find our own way to these drugs. So there's a website called drugsdata.org. And if you find yourself buying drugs and you want to know if it's what you think it is, you can send them a small sample. It's anonymous. They'll give you a code, and then they'll publish. We got sample 74521. It was purchased as MDMA, and it actually is MDMA, or it's actually ketamine and fentanyl and something else. So that's a really great harm reduction service that's out there. anyone with kids and teenagers, there's a dancesafe.org, I believe, sells testing strips. So assuming that your teenager or their friends may find their way to some of these medicines, these testing strips are also a very quick way for them to test at home what it is that they buy. So that's all related to
Okay.
source. So two really good resources that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Set is your mindset. So Michelle, you talked before about the preparation. What is your
Mm-hmm.
intention? But
Mm-hmm.
mindset is also like, do you know how long this is going to be? Do you know what possible? So even ketamine, I'll use that as an example. Like 1%, maybe 2% gets nausea with ketamine. Okay. You should know that you have a possibility of getting nausea. You definitely aren't going to, your legs get really heavy. So the ability to go to the bathroom on ketamine is hard. You should know that
Right.
in advance. So set relates to not only the preparation, but are you aware of all the things that could happen? This ketamine journey should be an hour, but if this happens, it could be longer. So you're at least aware. And then setting is the last piece. Are you in a place where you feel safe? You feel loved? You're not going to have the doorbell ring, the dog barking, the kids coming in,
Mm-hmm.
anyone interfering, talking to you during your inner exploration. A lot of people who talk about bad psychedelic experiences are ones that they did it at a party. They did it where they didn't know what they were taking and they didn't like the music. They didn't like the people. They didn't like the walls moving. They weren't ready. When you
Mm-hmm.
get source set and setting right, the probability of having an impactful experience is pretty high, like
Mm.
well into the 99%.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm not advocating that anyone go. We're not talking about party drugs. We're not talking about
Not at
doing this
all.
on a weekend with 20 people at your house having a party. That's not what this is about. Not at all. So thank you for saying that at the end there. Um, Anything else? Did I miss anything
You
else?
just brought up, you said 20 people at a party. So that just reminds me the other great question to ask your provider, especially if you're doing group work, which again,
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend group work. I think group
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics is the
Mm-hmm.
group ceremonial psychedelics is probably the most powerful way that I know of to experience this, but asking how many people will be participating with me. And I bring that up because one of the most popular, well known ayahuasca retreats typically takes 80 to 100 people at a time.
Oh,
So there,
wow.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's 80 to 100 people at a time. You should know.
Mm-hmm.
There's another high end entrepreneur one that does a really beautiful job, and it's 40 people. Again, just a different philosophy. Most of the ceremonial things that I've been closer to 15 to 20. And certainly there are some that are even more bespoke than that. So there's a range of retreat with an amount of participant, and not saying any is better than the other, but just you should know and think about what are you comfortable with. And then maybe also ask how many staff do they have or however many people are going to be there. And then just make whatever decision you feel is right for you. The 80
Mm.
to 100 person experience might be better for you because of the things they offer. The 20-person ceremonial experience might be better for someone else, and that's all okay.
Yeah. And again, don't forget to ask about integration because you don't want to have an experience and then not do anything with it. So very, very
Correct.
important. Very
Mm-hmm.
important. Wow. This was, I mean, so much information, Matt. Thank you. Like so much great information. And, at the least, we have a lot of great information and resources here. And we're giving people a lot to think about for sure. Thank you. Thank you for your
You're
book.
welcome.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, what a great resource for people. Really.
I hope so, Michelle. That was the goal, is to have people. It's not that everyone needs to take a psychedelic. It's that if they can read this book and say, okay, maybe it works for me, or maybe it works for someone I love, or I don't know anyone, but I can see why for society's sake, I
Mm-hmm.
should vote X, Y, this way on a ballot initiative in my area, or why I should let my congressman know that I'm for
Mm.
research and for access.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal here. And I appreciate the work you're doing with things like the adult chair and people
Yeah.
coming on these emotional development journeys and looking through these different paths to live a more optimal life.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, where would people find you? Let us know. Website, where do we buy the book? All the things.
Yeah, the book is available anywhere books are sold. Psychedelics for everyone. There's also an audio version if you prefer that. And that's fun. We had, I read a piece I read multiple pieces, and then all the pieces that were written by women are read by women. And
I love that.
so I think that's kind of fun. My website is mattzemon.com. I've got a bunch of short little videos that might answer questions people have. I have a free guide to microdosing. And yes, and then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you have questions that I can directly answer, feel free to ping me through either of those two mediums, and I'm happy to get back to you. I'm definitely here to answer questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you being on today.
Michelle, thank you for having me and doing what you do.
Thank you. I hope that you all enjoyed that show today. Just remember, do your research. And I would add this too. Make sure that if you decide to do psychedelics or a psychedelic, that you work with someone that is very, very, very well versed in these things, that has used them themselves. I can't recommend that enough. So anyway, hope you all enjoyed the show. I look forward to hearing from you about the show. Let me know how you liked it. And I'll see you seated right here next week in the adult chair.